I always thought the photo was beautiful in a lonely kind of way. Just a campfire burning in the snow, with a jagged mountain looming in the distance and the sky fading into blue-gray dusk. It was the last thing my sister ever sent me. She messaged it in the group chat with 3 words: "We made it." The timestamp said 1742. At 1803, every phone belonging to the 4 of them went offline at the same time. No goodbye, no call for help, no frantic last message, just silence. The rescue teams found their car parked neatly at the trailhead, locked, keys inside the glove compartment like they had expected to return any minute. What they didn't find was any sign of them. No tracks, no tent, no backpacks. Even the ashes of the campfire were gone, as if the picture itself had been taken in a place that didn't fully exist. The police said avalanche, despite there being no debris and no disturbed snow. People online said they probably slipped and fell into a crevasse, but when I zoomed in on that picture, really zoomed in, I noticed details nobody else cared about. There were boot prints around the fire. Several sets, yes, but there was also a second set of marks, long grooves, as if something had been dragged across the snow, or as if something with too many limbs had crawled close enough to bask in the warmth. When I pointed it out, everyone said I was grieving and seeing patterns that weren't there. Maybe they were right, but the town had a story, one I'd heard as a kid, and laughed off. They called it the Ember Trail. They said that long before the road and the ski resort, the mountain used to be a place of offerings. In winter, when storms buried the village, hunters would hike up to the valley and light a fire in the snow, leaving food, handmade figures, and sometimes, according to the darkest versions of the story, people. The thing in the white, they called it. No face, no voice, just a presence that came when fire met untouched snow. If the offering pleased it, the winter would be mild. If not, people disappeared. The old people muttered about it in the bar, but only when they'd had enough to drink. My sister knew all those stories. She was obsessed with them, actually. That's why she went up there with her friends, to make a true crime documentary about how urban legends blend with real cases of missing hikers. She wanted to prove there was a rational explanation for everything. Instead, she became part of the legend. I held on for 6 months, expecting a call, a clue, anything. When nothing came, I did the only thing that ever made the slightest sense. I tried to follow them. The first thing I did was trace their route. I checked her email, her laptop, her notes. They'd parked at the trailhead, then hiked north across the valley, planning to camp in a natural bowl where the wind supposedly couldn't reach them. The exact coordinates were scribbled in her notebook, accompanied by a little doodle of a campfire and a mountain silhouette that looked precisely like the one in the picture. A week later, I drove up alone, my car's headlights cutting through the drifting snow like weak flashlights in a sea of white. The road had that oppressive quiet that only mountains in winter have. No insects, no rustling leaves, just the crunch of tires and distant groaning of ice. At the trailhead, I stepped out into air so cold it felt solid in my lungs. Their car was gone, obviously, but the parking lot looked the same. A wooden sign warned about sudden weather changes, thin ice, and steep slopes. Nobody had bothered to put up a sign warning about legends that eat people. I checked my gear compulsively: GPS, satellite phone, spare batteries, flares, extra layers, enough food for days. It all felt theatrical, like I was preparing for an adventure instead of walking into the outline of a nightmare. I snapped a photo of the empty lot and sent it to my friend Mark with the words, "I'm going in. If I don't text by tomorrow afternoon, call the ranger station." He replied with a thumbs up and a, "You're insane." Maybe I was. I followed the trail markers at first, but there were no fresh footprints, just a soft wind smoothing the snow into gentle waves. As I climbed higher, the trees thinned, and the mountain began to dominate the horizon, exactly like in the picture. The sky turned the same dull blue-gray, clouds smeared thin like dirty cotton. The further I went, the less my phone wanted to work. No signal, just a blinking icon and a growing pit in my stomach. I told myself it was fine. The satellite phone would cover anything serious. Still, every time the GPS took half a second too long to refresh my position, my heart seized up. I reached the valley just as the last daylight was fading. The wind dropped to nothing, leaving a strange, humming silence in its place, like the world was holding its breath. The valley looked exactly like the photo, a broad, open field of untouched snow, ringed by dark pines, with the mountain rearing up over everything like some ancient animal preparing to pounce. I stopped at the spot my GPS said matched my sister's camp coordinates. I stood there for a long time, turning slowly in circles. No tent stakes, no broken branches, no discarded gear, just snow, smooth and undisturbed. But when I closed my eyes, I could almost hear their laughter, the crackle of their fire, the click of my sister's camera as she captured that last perfect shot. I don't know why I did it. Maybe because I wanted to recreate exactly what they did, step for step. Maybe because a part of me still believed that if I repeated their actions, I could somehow reverse them, like running a film backward. I cleared a circle in the snow, gathered dead branches from the tree line, and built a small, neat campfire. For a few seconds I hesitated with the lighter in my hand, remembering every whisper about how it came when the fire burned in the snow. Then I told myself legends were just stories, flicked the lighter, and touched the flame to the dry bark. The fire caught quickly, orange light licking at the darkness, heat stinging my face. For a moment, it was almost peaceful. The snow around it glowed faintly, reflecting the flames. The mountain watched, unmoving. I set up my tent a few meters away, but I couldn't bring myself to go inside. Instead, I sat on a log, hugging my knees near the fire, listening to the little pops and crackles, and trying not to imagine my sister sitting there too. I took out the printed copy of her photo, held it up, and compared the angles. The mountain was the same, the shape of the valley, the distant line of trees, all identical, except for one thing. In her photo, between two trees on the left, there was a faint, dark smudge I'd always assumed was just a shadow. But now, when I looked up at the actual tree line, that shadow wasn't there. The space between those two trees was empty. My heart kicked hard. I lowered the photo, raised it again, lowered it. In the picture, the smudge seemed taller than person, narrower, like someone had dragged a streak of black ink down the image. My hands were shaking slightly now, and not from the cold. I was about to shove the photo back into my pocket when a gust of wind I hadn't felt come and sent a wave of sparks into the air. The fire guttered, then flared brighter, as if fed by some invisible oxygen. And then, from the exact spot between those trees, I saw movement. At first, it was just a ripple in the air, like heat distortion on a hot road. But the temperature was well below freezing. The distortion thickened, darkened, stretching upward until it formed a tall, thin silhouette. It looked as if something was wearing the forest like a cloak, its edges dripping into the snow. I told myself it was my eyes, my grief, the way the firelight flickered, anything but what it looked like, a shadow stepping free of the trees. It didn't walk, it slid, each movement gliding over the surface of the snow without disturbing it. The closer it got, the more wrong its shape seemed. Too tall, limbs too long, head tilted at an unnatural angle as if it were listening to something buried beneath the ice. I tried to stand, but my knees refused. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to douse the fire, to do anything else but sit frozen as it approached. As it drew close enough for the firelight to touch its form, I finally saw it clearly. There were no features, no eyes, no mouth, no nose. Just a smooth black surface that swallowed light like a hole in the world. But as it stopped on the far side of the fire, something moved within that darkness, shifting like embers under ash. Then I heard it, not with my ears exactly, but inside my head, like a memory forced to the surface. "You brought a flame," a voice said, layered and distant, as if dozens of voices were trying to speak in unison but couldn't quite sync. "A dead was left, a line unfinished. You came to close it." My teeth chattered so hard, I thought they might crack. "Where is my sister?" I managed to get out. It tilted its head more, listening. Then the snow next to it stirred, and a hand broke the surface. A human hand, pale and shaking. Another followed, and another. One by one, people pulled themselves out of the snow like swimmers, emerging from thick, white water. I recognized my sister first. Her hair, her jacket, the little scar on her eyebrow. Her eyes were open but empty, pupils blown wide. Behind her came her 3 friends, and behind them, more and more faces that didn't belong to my time. Old hiking gear, outdated clothes, some in tattered uniforms I didn't recognize, dozens of them standing silently in a half circle around the fire. The shadow thing loomed behind them like a puppeteer. My sister took one step forward, the snow nut crunching under her boots. Her lips moved stiffly, as if the muscles forgot how to work. "You shouldn't have come," she said, voice slow, as if dragged up from somewhere deep and cold. "We tried not to call you. We tried not to remember you, but the mountain remembers, the fire remembers. It needed someone to finish it." "Finish what?" I whispered. She blinked once, the movement mechanical. "The offering." The word hung in the air like frost. Behind her, the faces of the others turned toward me in unison. Their eyes weren't empty after all. They were full of something terrible and desperate and trapped. They weren't simply dead. They were being used. The shadow behind them pulsed, and I felt pressure build inside my skull like fingers pressing into my brain. Images flashed through my mind. An ancient village buried in snow. People kneeling around a fire with something huge and shapeless hovering above them, their breath freezing as they chanted. A child being pushed forward, screaming, the fire flaring, the snow swallowing the sound. "Long ago, they bought their winters," the many-voiced whispers said. "They paid in lives and flames. They bound us to the pact, one fire in the snow, one soul claimed, and the storm would sleep. Then they forgot. They stopped paying. But the mountain remembers. The ledger is not balanced." My eyes burned with tears that froze on my lashes. "Take me then," I said, because what else was there? "Let the others go. Let her go." My sister flinched at that, the first real reaction I'd seen. The shadow's head swiveled slowly, considering. "One flame for many winters," it murmured. "One flame for many lives. It is inefficient, unfair." The chorus of voices shifted like different years, arguing with each other. Finally it said, "We will take what is owed all at once. You opened the way by bringing the flame. You lit the last fire. Now the snow will not sleep. Not here. Not anywhere you go." The ground shuddered under my feet. Cracks spider-webbed out from the fire pit, black lines splitting the white surface. The people around me began to sink, their bodies dragged down as if the snow had turned to liquid. My sister reached toward me as she sank, her expression twisting for the first time into something like pain. "Run," she whispered, but her voice was layered with the others, distorting the word. I stumbled backward, tripping over a buried rock. The fire roared higher, flames turning an unnatural deep blue, and the cracks chased out across the valley like veins. The last thing I saw before turning and bolting toward the trees was the shadow, leaning over the blue flames, stretching taller, as if finally, after all these years, it was fully awake. I ran without looking back, lungs burning, ears filled with the sound of snow collapsing and something huge shifting underneath it. When I finally dared to stop, I was deep in the forest, the valley hidden behind a wall of pines. The ground here was untouched, solid. The mountain loomed, but the air felt thinner, less suffocating. I collapsed to my knees, sobbing, my breath tearing from my chest in ragged clouds. I stayed like that until the first gray hints of dawn. When I finally made it back to the parking lot, the world was disturbingly normal. A couple of tourists were unloading skis, laughing, breath steaming in the cold air. A plow rumbled past, clearing the road. Nobody seemed to notice that the sky over the ridge was a shade darker than it should have been, as if stained. The rangers I'd warned months ago listened patiently as I babbled about cracks in the snow, voices, my sister's face. They exchanged glances, wrote words like trauma and delayed grief in their report, and escorted me to town. They checked the valley by helicopter that afternoon. Everything looked fine on their cameras. No cracks, no campfire, no sign of disturbance. Just the same flat, perfect snow they'd seen 6 months ago. That should have been the end. It wasn't. The first sign came 3 days after I returned home. I woke up in the middle of the night to the faint smell of smoke. Not cigarette smoke, not from the neighbors. Campfire smoke. Dry wood, pine resin, that particular scorched sweetness. I stumbled into the living room, half expecting to see flames, but everything was dark. The smell faded as quickly as it came. The second sign came a week later. I was walking home from work, snowflakes drifting lazily down, when I noticed something in the reflection of a shop window. Behind me, across the street, there was a narrow alley between two buildings. In the glass, the alley looked wrong, darker, stretched like the photo my sister had taken. I turned around. The alley was empty. When I looked back at the reflection, the dark, tall smudge was still there, sliding a little closer. After that, I stopped checking reflections. I tried to forget and failed. I moved apartments, changed routes, slept with the lights on. None of it helped. Sometimes, in completely ordinary places, a parking lot, a quiet street, a park after dusk, I would look down and see a thin line etched in the snow at my feet, like the first crack in a sheet of ice. If I stepped away, it would vanish. If I stared, I could hear the faintest echo of that layered voice. One flame, many winters. The worst part? Winters are getting stranger, not just in my town. Storms that were supposed to last days are dying overnight. Cold snaps end abruptly without warning. People in different regions report strange localized blizzards that appear for an hour and then vanish, leaving behind odd circular patterns in the snow where nothing will grow come spring. On the news, they call it climate chaos. In my bones, I know better. We didn't pay for those mild winters before. We're paying now. The ledger is being balanced everywhere all at once, and I was the one who lit the last fire in the snow, the one that woke it fully. My sister's photo is still on my phone. Sometimes I open it, zoom in past the campfire, past the boot prints, to that shadow between the trees. Each time I look, it seems a little clearer, a little closer to the camera. Tonight, as I stare at it again, the power flickers. The heater cuts off, and the room temperature drops so fast I can see my breath. Outside my window, snow has started falling, thick and heavy. Even though the forecast said clear skies, the glass fogs over, and written there in a thin line of frost as if traced by an invisible finger from the other side is a single word: offering. I grab my coat and head for the door because I know what comes next. Somewhere, in some quiet valley or empty backyard or lonely parking lot, someone else will decide to light a harmless little campfire in fresh snow, just to stay warm, just to take a pretty picture. And when they do, I know that Shadow will be waiting, ledger in hand, eager to finish what I started.